Okay, are we on? Your
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the MTT podcast. Today we have a special guest with us, Carl Jia. Welcome, Carl. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Oscar.
Hi. Okay, great. So, just a bit of background. Today's topic is Xinjiang. Specifically, we want to talk about or give context to and discuss the allegations of genocide, and we want to talk to you about what's happening in Xinjiang, what you think is happening in Xinjiang. But first, let's just give us a bit of background to our listeners about yourself. So, what's your background there, Carl?
So I was born and grew up in China. I was born in 1976, 1 month after Mao passed away. And I spent the entire decade of 80s in China, going to elementary school, junior high. And in 1990, I came to United States to join my parents, who were already my dad was the first generation of Chinese students going abroad after Cultural Revolution, and so completed my education in U.S. I went to high school, college. I stayed, worked there for 29 years until 2019. That's when I did a trip to Asia, and then that's when I realized I kind of fall in love with Bali. So that's where I'm right now. I
Okay.
also run a podcast called the Silk and Steel Podcast, which is
Mm,
primarily focused on China, history, culture, and politics. Um,
mm.
and yeah, I guess that's why you invited me today to talk about this topic.
Absolutely. That's it. Okay, great. So that's the sorry, I always get it wrong. Silk and Steel?
Yes.
Silk and Steel podcast. Okay, so you can find that. And where can we find your podcast?
Oh, it's on iTunes, Podbean. What's the other popular one? Um,
Stitcher?
Platform.
Apple?
Yes, yes. I'm on there as well.
Okay.
And I'm drawing a blank here. But you just Google for it, you'll
I'm
find
sure
it.
we'll find it. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the
yeah, and
type.
you also look me up on Patreon, so I have more like
Okay.
premium membership stuff there as well. So
Nice.
yeah.
Okay, that's great. That's great. I'm certainly going to be taking a look at that too. Wonderful. Okay. So let's start with the topic. I mean, yeah, I think before we get into the nitty-gritty of the current thing, the genocide and all that kind of stuff, let's put our perspective into the context, the background. So I think if we're talking about the grand context. Let's talk about how long has Xinjiang been a part of China? How far back does this relationship go?
Um, First, I'm gonna apologize for the background noise. My dogs are playing in my room, so you might hear a little bit growling as I
That's
talk. So I will try to keep this brief about the Xinjiang history because there's a lot of it. But for a short summary, Xinjiang is a very important region on the currently northwestern part of China, and about the size of Alaska, so it's huge. And this area, because it sits on very strategic region that connects China to the outside world, um, traditionally the area today we know as Xinjiang was known as Xiyue, or literally Western region in Chinese, and it sits on the historical Silk Road. So in the past, when China goes to connect with the world outside, especially to its west, the Silk Road goes through Xinjiang. So it's very strategic, and so since Han Dynasty, that's when the empires based in China, start incorporating Xinjiang as part of its territory. But then again, based on the strength of the Chinese-based empires, the control by different dynasty kind of wax and wane throughout the years. So after about so Han Dynasty, we're talking about like 2,000 years ago, right? But
Mhm.
about 1,000 years ago, around Tang Dynasty, as a result of kind of the slow collapse of Tang Dynasty, China lost control over this region, and since then it's kind of on and off. During the Mongol conquest era, the area what is today Xinjiang became a battleground between the Yuan dynasty based in China and the Chagatai Khanate based in Central Asia. But in 1760, as a result of the battle between the Qin dynasty China and the Zhuanggar Khanate that was based in Xinjiang, the two sides were fighting for supremacy, basically controlling of the Mongol people in between them, and in the end, the Qin dynasty triumphed. So by 1760, the Qin dynasty conquered the Zhuanggar Khanate that was based in Xinjiang and incorporated this whole area. So that's when the name Xinjiang came about, because Xinjiang means new territory in Chinese. And for the Qin dynasty at the time, that was new territory. That was the name that was given to this vast region. And so since Qin dynasty, that became kind of more or less incorporated into what we know as China today. There was a couple minor interruptions, like in 1864 there was a general greater Muslim rebellion in northwest China that spread to Xinjiang. So Qin dynasty lost control for about 15 years until like 1877. Then they restored control. But after the collapse of Qin dynasty, China entered into so-called the warlord era. So Xinjiang was controlled by warlords, and it was fought over. There was multiple rebellions happening in Xinjiang between 1930s and 1940s. It's very tumultuous time. Then in 1949, this is around the end of Chinese Civil War between the communists and the Kuomintang, the nationalists. At that time, Xinjiang was divided. In the three districts in northern Xinjiang, there was a brief establishment of the so-called the three district government that was backed by the Soviet Union. And the rest of Xinjiang, with the capital based in Urumqi, was controlled by the nationalists, by the Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist troops. But in 1949, as the communist victory became apparent in the rest of the mainland China, the nationalist garrison in Xinjiang decided to defect, and then the communists dominated northern district of Xinjiang, decide to incorporate into the merge with the Chinese Communist Party. And so that's how all of Xinjiang became incorporated into People's Republic of China of today. So that's kind of the brief history rundown of the Xinjiang up to 1949.
Brilliant. Now that was a beautiful and incisive, but not getting too lost in the details. That's brilliant. Thank you. So a Western territory at the edge of Northwestern territory at the edge of China, very big territory, and as you say, it was a battleground with Khanates, with the Mongolians, and later with the Civil War too, and even with a bit of Bolshevik or Soviet influence too around 1917 and during the warlord era of Chinese history. Okay, great. So in its current state, I guess we could say 1949, Xinjiang has been a part of China, but also it's been, I suppose, if we consider it part of Chinese, the warlord era, that the whole of China was fractured at that time.
Yes.
So you could also say that maybe since 1760 is kind of a better starting point of its more permanent sort of current form within Chinese, as a part of the Chinese state.
Yes.
So actually older than further back than the Republic, than the founding of the United States of America, basically.
Yes, definitely, definitely.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, to give sort of more of an example of another nation. Okay. All right. And so then can you describe Xinjiang to us, or how you see Xinjiang in terms of people? What is the region like? What makes it different to other regions in China? Because obviously there's a lot of variety in China. So what is Xinjiang like?
Yeah, Xinjiang is a very ethnically diverse region. So I'm sorry, that's my dogs again.
No
Stop by.
problem.
In Xinjiang, the majority of the population are Turkic speaking and also practicing Islam, right? So the demographics of Xinjiang kind of varied, but in 19 about yeah let's in during the Qing dynasty era, it was Xinjiang was divided. It's a huge region that if you look at it on a map, right through the middle of Xinjiang there's a massive Tianshan mountains that divides the region into two halves, the northern and southern part. And the southern Xinjiang is the homeland of what we call the Uyghur people. And the Uyghur people, they are a Turkic-speaking, a majority Muslim population. They so they the that they live mostly in the oasis cities along the edge of the Tarim Basin. So Tarim Basin is this is it includes this Taklamakan Desert, which is the world's second largest moving sand desert, and even though Xinjiang is big, but a huge part of it is taken up by desert. And along these deserts are these glacial-fed oases. That's where people live and farm, for thousands of years. And during 1930s, as a part of the policy within Soviet Union to kind of define ethnicity of the people in Central Asia, some representative from Xinjiang, they participated in the meeting in Tashkent in the Soviet Union at the time, and they decided to name the sedentary farming Muslim Turkic population of Xinjiang. They decided to give it the name Uyghur, right? But Uyghur is actually an ancient name. It was ancient people who migrated from Mongolia like about 1,000 years ago, that took over the whole region. But the name Uyghur kind of fell into disuse for like several hundreds of years, because originally Uyghur referred to this a population of Buddhists. When the Uyghur came from Mongolia, they adopted Buddhism, which was a local dominant religion back then. But by like 1600s, that term kind of fell in disuse. But in 1930s, in this kind of the nation, I guess you can say, nation building process that started in Soviet Union, they decided to adopt this name, ancient name of Uyghur, to name all the Turkic farming population that's living in Xinjiang. Right, but Xinjiang also has other different ethnicities. So there are also the Turkic Kazakhs and Kyrgyz who are nomadic. Practice animal husbandry, and there's also the Tajiks who live near the Pamir Plateau, and then there's also the Mongols who have been lived in Xinjiang for almost 1,000 years since the days of Mongol Empire. And then there's also the Chinese-speaking Muslims, where I'm talking about the Hui Muslims, and then the Han Chinese. So Han Chinese have been living in Xinjiang, kind of on and off, depending on the control from the China-based empires. But starting from 1760, as a result of Qing Dynasty acquired Xinjiang, the Xinjiang region was greatly depopulated during the war between the Qing Dynasty and the Zhuangger Khanate. And as a policy, the Qing Emperor Qianlong, decided to resettle heavily depopulated Zhuanggarian Basin, which is on the northern part of Xinjiang, north of Tianshan Mountain, with farmers from both inland China, heartland China, but also with Turkic farmers from the south, from southern Xinjiang. So that's why Xinjiang has this kind of very eclectic, very diverse population ever since. So right now, there's still divide. The northern Xinjiang is a bit more has a Han majority population. So the Urumqi, the capital Urumqi, for example, is like 75% Han Chinese. But in the south, in the traditional homeland of Uyghur people in the Tarim Basin, Uyghur people still make up the majority of the population. So overall, I think the demographics divide is about 70. I think there's 20 million people living in Xinjiang right now. Out of 20 million, there's 11 or 12 million are Uyghurs. So they compose about like 46% of the population. And whereas the Han Chinese make up another like 38% of the population. And then with the rest be made up by the Kazakhs, the Kyrgyz, the Tajiks, the Mongols, and the Hui Muslims, etc. Yeah. So that I hope like
No, this is good. This is good.
Okay.
This is good. I think it's good. The context is being set very well, I think. Okay, a quick question then. Just want to draw back a little bit, not too far into the history. During the Civil War, I know you mentioned that the KMT was in Urumqi, and then in the northern section, you mentioned that there was a breakaway, a sort of somewhat of a Soviet sort of influenced republic or a situation like that. Yeah. Where did the Uyghurs sit in the Uyghurs, as well as perhaps the other groups, perhaps primarily the Uyghurs? Where did they sit in the Civil War? Where were their predispositions?
Okay, so during after the collapse of Qing Dynasty, as I mentioned earlier, China kind of break apart into different warlord controlled territories. Xinjiang was controlled by a series of Chinese warlords until 1930s. 1930s, there was a big rebellion in Xinjiang against the Chinese warlord rule, and it was the rebellion started by the Uyghurs in what is today Kami or Kumo, and because that area used to be the land of the traditional the Khanate of Kumo, the Hami Khanate. So it was like a kind of semi-autonomous political entity that was granted recognition by the Qing Dynasty emperors. But in 1930s, when the last Khan of Kumo died, the Chinese warlord Jin Suren, he decided he's going to abolish the Khanate altogether. Area of Hami is in the eastern Xinjiang. It's near the Turpan Depression, Turpan Depression in eastern Xinjiang. Then rebellion broke out because the Chinese warlord, he was not only he abolished the traditional Khanate, and he was trying to import Han Chinese migrant settlers to come into the region. And that sparked of a rebellion, and the local Uyghur farmers, they reach out for help to the Chinese-speaking Muslims in the next province over in Gansu. So we're talking about the Hui Muslim. The Hui Muslim, the Hui Muslims, they are considered today. They're considered a separate ethnicity from the Han Chinese. Their mother tongue is various Chinese dialect, but they practice Islam, right? That's what set them apart from the Han majority. And the Hui Chinese Muslim warlord Ma Zhongyin, then he led his army into Xinjiang in 1930, in about 1933, and then there became a big free for all civil war that happened in Xinjiang. During this time, one of the original Uyghur rebels escaped to Kashgar, on the far west of Xinjiang, in the area of Kashgar and Khotan. Then they established the so-called first East Turkestan Islamic Republic, based in Kashgar. But this statelet only lasted 6 months because the Uyghur rebels, they had a fallout with a Hui Muslim warlords they invited over. So Ma Zhongyin wasn't happy that these Uyghur rebels decided to start their own thing. So he sent in his own the Chinese Muslim army to put down this so-called East Turkestan Islamic Republic in few months, and then he captured Kashgar. He decapitated the rebel leaders and actually pinned his head on the wall of the Kashgar mosque, because he was planning to start his own kind of little control area in Xinjiang, and then he continued his civil war with the Chinese warlord in Xinjiang. At this time was taken over by Sen Sicai, who was based in Urumqi. At this point in 1930s, the Soviet Union stepped in because Sen Sicai from Urumqi, he reached out to Soviet Union. And Soviet Union decided to come in on his side. So the Soviet actually sent over the Air Force, they sent over armor columns. So they crushed the Chinese Muslim army led by the Chinese Muslim warlord Ma Zhongyin in the southern Xinjiang. And the Xinjiang became, once again, quote unquote, united under the warlord Sen Sicai. And in 1930s, Xinjiang became somewhat of a kind of, we can, some people say, like a Soviet client state, so-called, because Sen Sicai, he reached his power because of the Soviet help. And so at one point, he even applied for membership in the Soviet Communist Party. It was turned down, but he was, he even applied for Xinjiang to join the Soviet Union. Again, that was turned down. Because Soviet Union wanted to reach their own separate agreement with the Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government. But then in 1941, we're talking about World War II, as the Nazi Germany's army was approaching Moscow in the Battle of Moscow. Sen Sicai, at this point, he thought he's doing his little calculation, because this also is around right after Pearl Harbor, after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. So United States entered war against Japan, and now U.S. officially became allies with China, nationalist China under Chiang Kai-shek. So he figured, okay, so U.S. is joining with Chiang Kai-shek, but the Soviets are being besieged in Moscow by the Nazi Germany. So I think his crystal ball telling him the Soviet star might be declining and the Chiang Kai-shek star is rising. So he decided he's gonna give the Soviet advisor the boot, and then he's gonna join Chiang Kai-shek. And at that point, there was a lot of Chinese communists actually working in Xinjiang because the connection with Soviet Union. So Mao's younger brother was actually in Xinjiang at the time, working in the government. So Sen Sicai arrested, purged all the communists from his government, arrested Mao's younger brother, had him executed, and officially declared allegiance to Chiang Kai-shek. And Soviet Union didn't take that very well because they felt betrayed. So in 1944. Soviet Union then sponsored a rebellion in northern Xinjiang, first led by the Kazakhs, but then later joined by the Uyghurs. And also a lot of the Soviet-educated Uyghurs and Kazakhs in Central Asia also returned to Xinjiang to join this rebellion. And you know, like Soviet financed this rebellion because they wanted to unseat the Chinese warlord Sun Cai. And they established, this was the establishment of the so-called the Second East Turkestan Republic in the three northern districts of Xinjiang. And the East Turkestan Republic government at the time was a broad coalition who were against the Chinese warlord Sun Cai. So it not only included like the Uyghur nationalists and communists, but it also included like more a traditional kind of conservative Islamist element. And the Soviets weren't very comfortable with that because they feel like these people could influence their, you know, their ethnic brethren back in Central Asia. So then what happened is with the Soviet sponsorship, the Uyghur and Kazakh communists in the three northern districts, they launched a soft coup and they purge all the kind of the conservative Islamist elements from the government. And also Soviet Union was entering into negotiation with Chiang Kai-shek's government about the post-war settlement in China. And as a part of that was, you know, the Chiang Kai-shek was supposed to recognize the formal independence of Outer Mongolia. But in exchange, the Soviet Union will respect the territorial integrity of China. So that would include Xinjiang and Manchuria and, you know, other parts. So then the Uyghur and Kazakh communists in northern Xinjiang, in the three northern districts, they officially took away the title of East Turkestan. They declared themselves the revolutionary government of the three northern districts instead. So, you know, they stopped using the title East Turkestan, and then they enter into negotiation with the KMT, because at that time, you know, Sun Cai, he went over to KMT, but then Chiang Kai-shek didn't trust him, so Chiang Kai-shek sent his own army into Xinjiang, and basically Sun Cai is out of the picture now, and the KMT army is now in Xinjiang, and now there was a brief standoff between the two armies, just just right outside of Urumqi. Right, the two sides were facing off across Manas River, but because of this complex background negotiation between Soviet Union and the nationalist government of China, they decided they're going to form a coalition government in Xinjiang, you know, with a representative from the three northern district and also from the nationalist side controlled area. So at that time. But in effect, you know, the northern district, the three northern district in the Yili Valley was kind of run on its own. It became an autonomous region at this time. But then, you know, 1949 hits. You know, the Chinese Civil War is wrapping to an end. The KMT army is being swept away from mainland China. And the KMT garrison in Xinjiang, they're still 100,000 strong. They were trapped. So they thought, okay, well, we'll just defect now. We'll just defect to the communist cause. And the Uyghur Kazakh communists, they say, hey, well, you know, the communists won, so we're going to merge our party together. They were going flying via Soviet Union to meet with Mao's government. But then there was a plane crash, which you know, like kind of wiped out the top leadership of the three northern district government. But the last remaining kind of the senior person was Sipidin. If people watch the founding of the People's Republic ceremony on documentary footage, you will know a man in fedora hats standing behind Mao, and that's a Uyghur communist Sipidin. He was considered one of the founders of the People's Republic. Because he brought the three district of Xinjiang over to the communist side, and that's how the whole of Xinjiang became incorporated into the People's Republic of China.
Gotcha.
So that's and at this time, Mao also ordered the People's Liberation Army, which entered into Xinjiang in 1949, about 100,000 strong, and also the surrendered KMT garrison, another 100,000 strong. So he ordered them to demobilize and become like soldier farmers in Xinjiang, and that's kind of like the start of the big Han Chinese migration into Xinjiang, because now there's suddenly like all these 200,000 soldiers got demobilized and stationed in Xinjiang, and then they there was very mean. So they actually, there was some schemes for finding wives for them from inland China. Like they were famously sending in women from Hunan, from Shandong, from Shanghai to pair off with the soldiers. And then in 1960, as a result of the Great Leap Forward, there was a great famine in China. A lot of the famine refugees in surrounding provinces, because at this time Xinjiang was least affected by the famine during 1960s. Xinjiang came out pretty well. So a lot of the Chinese farmers from Gansu, from Henan, they went over to Xinjiang to join their relatives in the army, and this was one of the largest kind of migration wave of the Han Chinese people into Xinjiang. There was about 1 million famine refugees. And then on top of that, in 1960s, after Cultural Revolution, Mao also sent a lot of the educated youth to the countryside and to the frontier. So there's another million or so just Chinese educated youth that got sent to Xinjiang. So that's when the kind of the demographics of Xinjiang changed, when the Han Chinese became about around 40% of the population, start from 1960s. That figure kind of stays the same until pretty much today. Basically, the kind of the demographic spread. 40%, about 40% Han Chinese and 46% Uyghur population divide. Kind of started from that period forward.
I see. I just wanted to touch on something. Thank you. That was excellent details there, and some of the stories. The anecdote about Mao's brother being killed, that was interesting, very interesting. I just wanted to touch back.
People who are interested, there's a book called the Warlords and Muslims. Is a Xinjiang the Xinjiang in the Chinese Republican era by Forbes. People can look it up. It's really expensive though, because it's one of those academic books. So get it. People know where to find it.
Right. Just wanted to touch on something. So Sipida, this character, said he was wearing a fedora at the founding of the People's Republic of China. So he was the leader of the three districts, as you say, a revolutionary leader. He was a Uyghur.
Yes.
So was he continued? Sorry, did he die in the plane crash of the leadership?
No. So after the plane crash, he became the most senior leader. Yeah. So he was with. He actually served like during the Cultural Revolution. He was so actually, because of his own effort, Xinjiang was turned from a province into autonomous region in 1954, and in fact it was named a Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. The Uyghur was attached to the naming of the region, because he famously said, autonomous region is not about given to like mountains and rivers. It's about to given to people. So like
yes.
So that's how Xinjiang became Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region today. And he was actually the kind of the top leader, both in political and military sphere in Xinjiang throughout the Cultural Revolution.
Mm.
And he kind of, when he went to, at the end of the Cultural Revolution in 1978, he kind of took a retirement role. He went to Beijing. He became, was part of the Chinese political consultation, or the Chinese People's Congress. Like in 1980s, he retired to Beijing. But
I
up
see.
to this time, he was in Xinjiang. He was in charge.
I see. I see. Okay. Yes, that's what exactly wanted to touch on. So this Sipita, he was a leader from 1949 up until the 80s. And I just wanted to just if you could touch on uh, the what. So there's a couple questions. Firstly, the relationship that the Uyghurs have had with the party, particularly since 1949. Was Sipita the sort of main character? Were there other leaders? Also, in terms of the leadership of the Uyghur population, do they have cultural leaders? Do they have a religious leader like many other Muslim communities around the world do? And then also, just on top of that, without going into too much detail, perhaps if we can just give a basic explanation, what does it actually mean, an autonomous region? What autonomy does that actually entail?
Okay, so I'll address autonomy first, because
Sure.
that's easier to address.
Okay.
So by Chinese constitution, the autonomous regions, they have the rights to educate like the people in their indigenous language. So for example, up to 2000, in Xinjiang, there's a separate tracks for Uyghur education. You can choose. You can either choose for like a Mandarin education or like Uyghur only track, which can go all the way to college. You can be educated from kindergarten to college only in Uyghur language. So
Wow.
education rights is one, very important. If you go to autonomous region in China, whether in Inner Mongolia or Xinjiang or Tibet, you will see on the signboards there will be there will be two languages. There will be the Chinese characters, but then there's also the local, the indigenous languages. So
Mm.
that's one of the I'm not sure about Xinjiang, but I know in Inner Mongolia, to be a government worker, you have to be fluent in both. Like there are tests for government workers. You have to have fluency in both Mongolian and Mandarin Chinese. That
Mm.
was a requirement to work in the government. And so that's one of the big difference. And also like the chairman of the Xinjiang Autonomous Uyghur Autonomous Region have to be a Uyghur, right? So
Okay.
I mean that underneath there's also a different within in Xinjiang, there's also different autonomous prefectures for other ethnicities. So for the Tajiks, they have like a Tajik autonomous county of Tashkurgan. For the Kazakhs, they have the Ili Kazakh autonomous prefectures. So
Hmm.
so yeah, there's different levels of autonomous administration. But that yeah, but preference of cultural language uh, will be given to the autonomous regions. Like for example, I went to the Dai Autonomous Prefecture in Yunnan in 2019.
Hmm.
And other than the language issue I talk about, about there will be Dai language script. It was Dai and Jingpo autonomous prefecture, so it will be a Dai or Jingpo and Jingpo scripts everywhere. But
Mm.
they also they will have their own cultural holidays, right? So the Dai New Year, Jingpo New Year's are
Mm.
celebrated. Like the government schools will they will honor that. And
Mhm.
and another for the particular case of the Daijinpo Autonomous Prefecture I went to is a border area because it's on the border with Myanmar, and the people there they can freely enter and go cross the border between China and Myanmar. But if they have residents, if they can show they're the residents of the autonomous prefecture. But that's because
Okay.
that was on the border zone. but so there is a different separate checkpoint. Once you leave the autonomous prefecture into other parts, there will be there will be other checkpoints. It's almost like another border check.
I see. I see. I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
It's not that open. It's not complete. It's not just a big hole in the border that you can go all
No,
the way
no, no.
Beijing, right?
No, no.
Okay. 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 I see. That's fascinating. Okay. And so I think yes, that's what the autonomous region side of stuff. So a lot of education, freedom. Then the local sort of leader of the autonomous region must be a Uyghur, and there is also a breakdown within the autonomous region. Kazakhs having their own autonomous sort of prefecture, as you called it. Just to touch again on Sipida and the leadership, so
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
relationship the Uyghurs have with the Communist Party since no
So
1949.
So there was, as you well know, there was the Sino-Soviet split in the early 1960s. That actually affected Xinjiang because before 1960, so there was a lot of Soviet influence in Xinjiang, right? We already mentioned earlier, the Soviet Union
Yes.
influenced a lot of the politics in Xinjiang. A lot of progressives in Xinjiang, they actually look to Soviet Union as example, especially to all these different different republics in Central Asia, right? Soviet republics in Central Asia. So as a result of the Sino-Soviet split, at the time, the Soviet Union was also trying to develop Central Asia, so there were shorter labor. So they tried to attract people from Xinjiang to go across the border. So in 1962, there was a so-called Yilin incident. That's when the Soviet consulate, they were handing out Soviet passport very freely to anybody who asked. And then, about over 60,000 people in the Yili district, they went across the border to Soviet Union. So there's a large Uyghur and Kazakh diaspora, from Xinjiang to the Soviet Central Asia, resulting from earlier in history, but also from that period of time. And actually that will place in during the Cold War, after the Sino-Soviet split, the Soviet Union actually encouraged like kind of the separatism in Xinjiang, using a lot of the Uyghur exiles in diaspora in Soviet Central Asia. They will set up broadcasts in Uyghur and Kazakh language to over to Xinjiang and encourage separatism. And but you also mentioned basically all the Uyghur communists, Uyghur Kazakh communists who were more pro-Soviet, they left in 1960s.
Okay.
So that's what I'm trying to say. And then, right, but, I mean, there was always kind of a even back in the day of the Second East Turkestan Republics, there was kind of the Soviet faction versus like the pro-CCP faction within that northern district government. And what you may say, I guess you can say the pro-CCP faction remained in China. Mm-hmm. The pro-Soviet faction, they left for the Soviet Central Asia, if that makes sense. And then, yes. So during Cultural Revolution, it has to be pointed out that there was a period when China was entering this era where all religions were banned, right? Like Christianity, Buddhism, Taoism, Islam, everything was banned. So, that to answer your question about the Uyghur cultural leaders, the other side of the divide, there was the progressives, who work, who joined the Communist Party, but there's more the conservative side, the conservative religious side. Traditionally, they're tied with either the landowning class or the clergy, right? And they also happen to be the clergy also happen to be the largest landowners in Xinjiang. So in 1950s, the first thing that happened was the land reform. So the central government that took away all the land from monasteries, from mosques, from So all the land was taken away, and then in 1960s.